In section 4, 2D modeling, we're going to be covering all of the two-dimensional modeling tools that can really round out your model and play off of the three-dimensional model that we've already kind of talked about and discussed how to create. So the first thing we're going to be talking about are dimensions and how the dimension kind of strings work, how we can get the look that we're after for different dimension lines, and how those kind of appear, the text, the kind of leader lines, all of that sort of stuff. Then we're going to get into line styles, which is kind of exactly what it sounds like, the different types of lines that you find within Revit, patterns that are associated with them, color, and kind of line weight that's associated with those various line styles. Then we'll get into detail lines and hatch regions. So creating hatches and filled regions, masking regions, and using detail lines to really kind of enhance different areas of our Revit model. And then finally, we're going to get into detail components. So when to use a detail component over a detail line or a hatch region. But detail components are more your two-dimensional version of a component, similar to what we've already talked about with the architecture text component. This is the two-dimensional version of that. In today's video, we're going to be discussing dimensions. So we're going to be going over the different types of dimensions, be that kind of linear or aligned dimensions, radiuses, diameters, all of that sort of stuff. And then we'll be getting into how to create a dimension string. And then once that's created, how to edit and adapt it to get the kind of use that we want out of it. And then we'll finally get into the dimension type properties and all of the different things that we can change about a dimension string or the overall appearance of a dimension line. So as we get into Revit, I've created some walls here for us to use just as a reference for dimensioning and that sort of thing. But we're going to come up here to the Annotate tab, which is essentially the two-dimensional modeling tab, similar to the architecture tab being the three-dimensional modeling tab. So under Annotate, we have an entire section for dimensions over here. And we've got all different types depending on what you're trying to do. So the most used one is going to be the Align tool. Obviously, we have kind of angular and radial ones. And then the linear tool is basically for when you're angling and you don't want the actual angle length, you want the kind of legs of that angle. So you can see there in that description or a little preview there that 5 to 20, they're not giving you the actual angle, you're giving the leg of that angle. So the Align tool is more just as you click along how that works. So I'm going to choose the Align tool, and then as I choose that, I get all of my options again over here. So I can flip between the different types as I need them. Then I've also got this option down here. So am I choosing wall center lines? Am I choosing wall faces? What do you want it to snap to, essentially? And then picking individual references. So am I choosing like a piece of a wall or am I choosing an entire wall? Typically, I personally run with individual references. If you want to give entire walls a shot, by all means. So I'm going to go ahead and click these into place. And I can just select various options as I go along. So maybe I don't want the center line of this door. I just want the edge and then the full width of the door and then the end over there. So once I've got all of these clicked, I just kind of click out in space to place that and lock it in. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of the tool, and then I'm going to select my dimension string here. So once I've got my dimension string selected, I have got the option of all of these different nodes. Now the node at the very bottom of each one of these little leader lines controls kind of where that leader line ends. So I can click and drag that up and down and just kind of set it wherever I'd like it to be. Maybe I don't want that extending down into my drawing. I just want it kind of up in line with all of these other ones. I can do that. Or this other node that's up here, if I click and hold that, I can change what it snaps to. So right now I'm snapping to the center line, but if I want to snap to, say, the face of the wall, I can go ahead and find a point to do that. Or if I can't get something to snap to, I can hit Tab and it'll cycle through some other options. So I can go ahead and snap to that point. Now, let's say I've created this string and I misclicked on something. Maybe I don't want this door within my dimension string. I can come up here and hit Edit Witness Lines, and I can just click that, whatever I clicked on before, and it'll eliminate that from the dimension string. Another thing that you may want to do at some point is, let's say I've got this big, huge, long dimension string here, and I don't want this 2'6" in there. I want the 5 foot, and I want the 6 foot, but I don't want this 2'6" dimension in there. I can come in and highlight over top of my dimension string and hit Tab and grab just that dimension, and then hit delete, and it'll eliminate it from that string. Now, when I do that, it breaks the connection between those two, so now these are independent of each other, but you can eliminate a single dimension from that rather than having to go all the way across and dimension the whole thing out again. Another node that you see that we can play with are the nodes underneath each one of the dimensions. So right now I've got this 3 foot is kind of overlapping this 1 foot. I can grab that node and drag that text off to the side. If I don't want a leader line coming between those two, I can turn that off up here, and it'll just go ahead and float the number out to the side. If you want it back on, you just turn that back on. So that's kind of how dimension strings work in a nutshell. We can also do radial and kind of diameter options. So if I come in and say, okay, what's the radius of this? I can go ahead and select that. Now, sometimes if you have a more subtle radius, you're going to have this issue where that radius dimension is going to extend really far into your drawing, and this isn't going to be kind of what you're after. So I can click and drag that point all the way back up towards that section there. Now, I can also turn off that center mark. And that center mark you can find under this Edit Type option. So under the Edit Type window, you'll have all sorts of different options for how you can change the visibility of the dimensions. So everything from what the text looks like, is it bold, is it underlined, italic, the text size, the text font, all of that sort of stuff can be adjusted within your Edit Type properties. Other things down here, this is where that center mark shows up, so I can turn that center mark off if I don't want to see it. If I have a really subtle arc and all of a sudden this little mark appears on a floor plan and it's really far from that wall, that's probably not going to be immediately recognized as, oh, that's the center line of the radius from that arc. So you can change the radius text. So having the R beforehand, do you want to use something else? There's all sorts of different things that you can get into. So what's tick mark line weight and all of that. So if I zoom in here and I go ahead and turn off my thin lines, you can see I have these pretty big tick marks there that are a slightly thicker line weight. So under Edit Type, the tick mark line weight, I can go ahead and back that off if I wanted to. I can also shrink the tick mark down. So instead of 1/8 inch, maybe I want something a little bit smaller and a little bit cleaner. So you can come in and adjust the visibility of your dimensions pretty easily. And they're fairly easy and intuitive to use. Like I said, you can kind of come in and use these nodes to adjust and get to the correct points that you really want to use. One other thing that I mentioned, but can be reiterated in a slightly different context. If I grab this little node that gives me the option of changing where I'm snapping to, if I go to a joint on the corner there, I can hit Tab and go ahead and grab an individual point rather than a line. So let's say I come off to the side here and I want all the way to where that arc just starts to take off. I can hover over right in that section and it's going to give me that little highlighted circle, that little node right there. If it doesn't automatically show up, I can hit Tab and start cycling through some various options and get that very end point there. So I can select that and it'll give me the option that I want. So that's a brief introduction to dimensions and their type properties and the different kind of uses and nodes that you can use to get the look that you're after for your dimensions.